Hello and welcome to this IFL's webinar about depositing author accepted manuscripts in institutional repositories. I'm here today with my colleague Lorraine Stell, who is IFL licensing program manager, and she'll kick off this webinar. So over to you, Lorraine.
Thank you, Irina, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's joined us today. I'm meeting a lot of you for the first time, which is really lovely. So always great to make new friends. I thought I'd start off by talking about some of the terms and the acronyms that we find in scholarly publishing. And really important to us today is talking about these versions of an article. And our theme today is really about author accepted manuscript. That's also known as the AAM, or sometimes, just to make it even more confusing, the AM. And this is the version of an article after peer review, after a journal's peer reviewers have made their comments and the author has addressed those comments, but prior to the publisher's typesetting and any copy editing that they do. The other important version of the article is the version of record, and this is the version of the article after the publisher's typesetting, and it's the version that the publisher makes available from its website, from the journal's website. So those are the two versions, or two of the versions of the article that we're concerned with today. Now, the AAM, the author's accepted manuscript, is a very important version, and it's particularly important if an article is published closed access. Of course, through IFL agreements, we do have agreements which enable authors to publish open access without paying a fee, or by paying a discounted fee, discounted article processing charge. But still, many authors are publishing in closed access because they, for one reason or another, from their journal or the discipline, they're not able to publish in open access. So the AAM is the only version of that type of article that can be made available open access in a repository. Now, most publishers allow the AAM to be deposited into an institutional or a disciplinary repository where it will be available open access. And this is very important because it really maximizes the visibility and the impact of that article. And of course, if an author has an article published behind the paywall in a closed access journal, it can be quite difficult for them to share their research output. If they can only do that, of course, to people who have access to that journal. But if it's in the repository, they can send links and so on. So the author's accepted manuscript is really a great way to improve the visibility of those articles. So the next question really, and this can be quite complicated, is how can an author get their accepted manuscript for deposit in the repository? Now, an author may be able to download it from the journal's submission system as soon as they receive notification that their article has been accepted for publication. This can, though, be a little bit tricky because publishers vary in how long they keep the AAMs in their systems. Some keep them in the systems for quite a long time. Others, the AAM will disappear very quickly after the author has received the notification that their article has been accepted. Now, if an author goes to the publisher's submission system and they cannot find their AAM, they can contact the journal. It's usually the editor of the journal, and they can request it. But we do have a top tip here, and our top tip is to advise authors to retain the final version of the article they uploaded into the journal's submission system. Now, this might sound rather obvious, but sometimes it can be quite difficult to identify because people don't always change the name of the document, and they might not be quite sure which was the last version. So version control, naming the various stages of the article are quite important, and retaining that final version that was uploaded can be really important if there is a problem in retrieving the accepted manuscript from the author's, from the publisher's submission system. Now, we have produced a guide for authors, which we'll share the link with shortly. And we have produced a sort of 7 steps to getting the AAM. And I'll just read through these. In the 7 steps, the you we refer to is the author, is the author of the article. So the first step is you write an article and plan to submit it to the journal. This first version is called a preprint, and many publishers allow this to be uploaded to a repository, a preprint repository. But it's worth remembering that this is the version before peer review. You, the author, submit your article to the journal, and the editor and the referees peer review your article. Step 4, you amend your article according to the reviewer's comments and resubmit to the journal. Now, it's worth mentioning here that sometimes there may be slightly more steps. The resubmitted article reviewers may ask for a few more changes, so that there may be more versions around this. But typically, we can assume that mostly the author will address all the peer reviewers' comments the first time. But I think it highlights why this version control is quite important. So your article, that's the author's article, is accepted for publication. And this is your AAM. This is the version of the article that can be retained for depositing in a repository for open access. 6, the publisher copy edits and formats your article for publication in a journal. 7, your article is published in the journal, and this version is called the version and record. Now, typically, if that version and record is behind a paywall, it's controlled access, that version cannot be published or deposited in a repository, and therefore it's so important to keep the AAM version. Now, once the author has obtained their AAM version, they can immediately pass that to the repository manager for deposit in the institutional repository, or in some cases, repositories allow the authors to upload it, self-archive it themselves. Now, a very important point about this is that some publishers allow the AAM to be made available in the repository immediately, but some publishers only allow this after an embargo period. Now, Irina will talk through some of the publishers that we have EIFL agreements with and some other publishers, what their policies are. But really important is that repository managers are aware that these embargo periods vary quite considerably Some publishers, for example, the AAM can be made available in a repository immediately. Sometimes it may be 6 months after publication, a year after publication, or in extreme cases, even 2 years after publication. So it's quite a complicated landscape in terms of all these different publisher policies. But the good news is there's a really good tool that you can use to check a journal's embargo period. And that is by using the service Sherpa Romeo. And you can see we've given you a link here. And of course, that will be in the slides when you get them. As I say, this is quite a complicated landscape with all these different acronyms, all these different stages in the publication, and of course, the different embargo periods imposed by the different publishers. We have produced some guidelines that are available from the IFA website, which you can share with authors in your institution. This is just a screenshot of the guide that we've produced, and you can see we've got the 7 steps there to help the authors understand the process. And again, we have the link there to the guide, which of course you can download and share with authors in your institution.
Thanks a lot, Lorraine. And these guidelines are openly licensed, so you can also reuse the text or include these guidelines in your guidelines. So please feel free to use them any way you want. And if you want an editable version of these guidelines, please reach out to either me or Lorraine, and we'll make sure that you have it. So Lorraine and I had a look at publisher policies with whom IFA has agreements, and in this part I'll highlight some of them, and I'll just go alphabetically. So the first one is ACM, and it's an example of a publisher that doesn't have any embargo periods for depositing preprints, and also AAMs in institutional repositories or in any other non-commercial repositories or aggregators, or also home pages. And IFA's agreement with ICM includes a clause that ICM could actually deposit AAMs directly in repositories we tell them to deposit to. So if you are a repository manager and if you would like to enable that automatic depositing feature of articles published in ICM, and if it's an open access article, then it will be publish a PDF that will be deposited. If it's a closed access article, then ACM will deposit an AAM. So again, please let me know, and we'll work with you to enable this automatic depositing. But if not, just tell your authors that they can give you their AAMs, or they can deposit AAMs directly if you allow authors depositing papers in your repository. And this is an explanation what exactly could be deposited. So they use archive discipline repository as an example, and they say that any version except the version of record could be deposited. And they do request to post published version DOI alongside a pre-published version, so that there is a link to the published version of record. So it's a metadata field where you would add DOI. Another example is here, and that's also a good example of a publisher that doesn't have embargo periods, and they actually include information about their archiving policy in the acceptance letters, and in the publication, after publication letters that authors receive. So as you see, Brill allows depositing both preprints and also manuscripts without embargo periods. So a preprint could be deposited at any point of the publication process, and also manuscript could be made openly available immediately after publication in repositories. So that's another good example where you can encourage your authors to immediately deposit and provide open access to AAMs after publication. Cambridge University Press is a publisher that has embargo periods, and they have 6 months after publication for science, technical and medical journals, and they allow depositing and providing open access on acceptance for humanities and social sciences journals. And that's how this information is presented on their website. So you can see that a preprint or submitted manuscript could be deposited at any time, and author accepted manuscript could be deposited on a personal web page on acceptance, but then in repositories following 6 months embargo period for science, technical, and medical journals. EIFL has an open access publishing agreement with a company of biologists, and authors from a lot of our partner countries could publish for free in open access. And then in that case, if your country is a part of that agreement, then you can deposit, authors could publish open access, and publish a PDF could be deposited in the repository. De Gruyter is a publisher that has a 12 months after publication embargo period, and as other publishers, they require that the published source must be acknowledged, and a link to the journal homepage with articles DOI must be provided. Then Edward Elgar Publishing has an interesting policy. So they say that prior to publication, once the work has been accepted for publication, then the version that was submitted can be posted to personal website, a not-for-profit subject repository, or university institutional repositories. And there are certain conditions. So the first one is that the chapter or article should be taken down upon publication of the Elgar book. And they also have a specific text that should be displayed together with deposited article, book, chapter. And then after publication, there is a 6 months embargo period for making the work available in the repository. And there is also a required text that should be included in the descriptive metadata when this article, a book chapter, is made available after 6 months embargo period. European Respiratory Journal is also a publisher where many IFL countries have free open access publishing agreements, and then some countries have discounted publishing options. And then again, if it's an open access publication, then a publisher PDF could be deposited under the published open access license. For those authors who aren't publishing open access with this journal, they have 12 months embargo period for making AAMs openly available. They also require TOI. They have a standard notice. IOP has a 12 months embargo period for an IAM as well. And, this is a page from their website where they talk about AAM. And they also specify under which Creative Commons license this AAM could be made available. So they say that there is a 12 months embargo period, and then this article could be made available under CC BY non-commercial, no derivatives license or non-open access publications. And they also explain that if you publish open access with IAP, then most of their journals, most of the open access journals have CC BY license. And then, of course, a publisher PDF could be deposited under a CC BY license. But some journals have different licenses, and then they have a page explaining when and which license was used. But I think you can just have a look at published article and just follow that license for open access articles. Then IWA or EVA is another publisher that allows making open access articles available in repositories under CC BY or CC BY non-commercial no derivatives license. And if it's not an open access article that was published before January 21, then an AAM could be made openly available 12 months after the embargo period. And they have this handy diagram where they explain who owns which version of article. So they say that a submitted version and also accepted version is a version that an author owns. But then when they start copy editing process, typesetting, and when they publish an article, then those two versions of article, proofs and version of record, are owned by a publisher. And if they are not open access articles, then there is this 12 months embargo period. MSP is another example of no embargo, repository friendly open access publisher. So they allow authors to deposit the last version of their manuscript after peer review, AAM, to the archive, any other preprint server, and also an institutional repository. And they also say that if a funder requires that AAM should be made available under CC BY license, they allow that. And they also ask to include a DOI, the published article. And they also have an interesting clause about authors retaining copyright. So they say that they offer their authors to retain an option. They offer their authors an option to retain the copyright of their work. And as we know, more and more funders started requiring from their grantees to retain copyright. So that's how publisher adjusted to this requirement. OUP allow immediately uploading their AAMs to institutional or other non-commercial repositories, but it's only about uploading and not about making publicly available, because to enable access to that uploaded AAM, repository should follow embargo periods, and there is a link to descriptions of embargo periods for different journals. So for most of them, it's 1 year embargo period, but there are some journals with 18 months embargo period, and social science and humanities journals usually have 2-year embargo period. But you can check when you know the journal title, you can check with a link below. Then the Royal Society is a publisher that allow depositing preprints at any time, and AAMs upon acceptance, and they can be both deposited and made available freely. But they interestingly, they describe their preprints at AAM and embargoes policy in a document which is called Media Embargo, because they also have a media policy that doesn't allow journals to disclose results before those results are published. So there is a link to this repository-friendly deposit policy in media embargo policy. Sage is a publisher that allows posting AAMs, and they don't have embargo periods, and they add that if an AAM is made available in the repositories, and it should be made available under a license that that allows non-commercial use only, and not allowing making derivative copies. Taylor and Francis allows posting AAMs on also personal websites at any point after publishing an article. But they do have embargo periods for making AAMs available in institutional or disciplinary repository. And to figure out what an exact embargo period is for making AAMs available, you have to go to Open Access Cost Finder, which is the second link on this slide, and you have to choose a journal, and then you'll see what is embargo period. And as part of IFL's agreement with Taylor and Francis, those institutions who have subscriptions to Taylor and Francis could deposit publisher PDF, and there is a 12 months embargo period for making publisher PDFs available for science, technology, and medicine, and 18 months for social sciences and humanities. And then World Scientific has an interesting policy. So they say that if a research is funded by a funder that is a member of Coalition S, and that adheres to Plan S transition into full open access, then if there is such a funding requirement, then a journal also retains the right to deposit AAM in an institutional or subject repository at any time of at the time of publishing, and CC BY license or another license permitted under Plan S could be used. And then, of course, a requirement that articles must be accompanied by appropriate acknowledgement with citation and linking. But if an author is not funded by a funder which is a member of Coalition S, then there is a 12 months embargo period for making AAMs available. And they also clarified that because they have this 12 months embargo period, that's a period when they really keep an AAM in a system, and a corresponding author could access it, download in case she doesn't have a copy of an AAM. But then after 12 months, it will be removed from the system. So it's really echoing Loren's tip. It's really important to tell researchers that they should keep their AAMs or get them as soon as possible. And then for other publishers, we had a look at Elsevier, and Elsevier allows preprints sharing at any time. And when there is a published version of the article, then they encourage authors to link a preprint to a final version of the article. And then for AAMs, they only allow updating a preprint with an AAM version on archive and REPAC repositories. And for institutional repositories, they only allow making AAMs available in internal institutional access only, or if a repository could enable access to an article by invitation to collaborators, but it can't be made openly available in an institutional repository, only in archive and REPAC. And then there is, so that's about immediate open access. And then there are different embargo periods for making AAMs openly available in institutional repositories. And here you should really check individual journal policies, what an embargo period is for making an AAM openly available in the repository. So these are some of the tips that we came up with, and we would like to have a discussion with you how you handle AAMs and what tips do you give to your authors, and maybe we can enrich our list of our tips with your tips. So I think it would be useful if you know where your researchers publish, if you could have a document where you would track publisher, copyright, and embargo policies. And if you could make that list available to your researchers. It would be good if your institution adopts a policy where you require depositing AAMs and then follow publisher rules to provide open access, or consider adopting a strong open access policy saying that authors retain rights and could make AAMs available under an open license at the time of publication. But in any case, I think it's good to have this AAM mentioned in a policy, because before, when repository movement started, we were used to terms like preprint, postprint, and then version of record. So now this postprint isn't often used by publishers. So what publisher use and funders use is AAM. So maybe it's better to have an AAM as a term in your policy document. Then what you could also do, you could set up alerts. So I don't know what kind of bibliometric tools you have. Google Scholar is free, so you could set up alerts like notify me if anything is published with my institution's name, and that's free. Then if you have Scopus and Web of Science, you could also set up alerts there for your institutional publications. And then when you receive a notification that an article was published by a researcher from your institution, you could send an email to that researcher congratulating her with publishing an article, and also asking for an AAM to share to deposit in your repository, or asking her to deposit directly if you allow that. And I like UCD library repository guide, because they have a lot of useful information for researchers about their repository and about embargo periods and about making articles openly available in repositories. And what they also have, they have this document which they compiled for their researchers, which is called Publishers' Copyright and Embargo Policies, where they just list all the journals where UCD researchers publish in, and include information about which version could be deposited in the repository and when. So maybe that's something that you would consider doing. And then we mentioned that if you want to, like, how can you figure out which version you have? So usually a publisher PDF has publisher formatting in place. So you'll see a name of a publisher, you'll see page numbers, you'll see text usually in 2 columns. And then an also accepted manuscript would be most likely a Word document, no columns, no publisher branding. But in case you're still puzzled which version of the article you have, then you can use Share Your Paper to check whether this version of the article that you have could be deposited in the repository or not. So if you go to shareyourpaper.org, you start by entering EDOI of this article, and then you can you will receive information what is a publisher policy, and then you can upload a file that you have. For example, if a publisher policy is that only an AAM could be made available in a repository after embargo period, then you can upload a file that you have, and you'll receive an email notification saying, correct, the version that you have is actually an AAM that could be deposited. But if in case that version that you have is a publisher PDF, then you'll receive a notification saying what you have is a publisher PDF, and a publisher doesn't really allow making it openly available. So it's just a tool to check if you want to the version of the article that you have. And speaking about rights retention, and that's a topic that we can really spend an hour talking about. Recently, we had a webinar with Sally Ramsey and Johan Rurik from Coalition S, where they discussed how universities could adopt rights retention policy. And there is a link to that webinar with slides and recording. And if you want, we can spend some time later on looking at that in more details. But I see some questions. So let's maybe go to your questions first. And if you want to ask your question as you speak, just please raise your hand. Let's start. So George is asking, I would like to find how my faculty's publication could be deposited directly into our IR. So if you mean directly by publisher, then like I said, we only have an agreement with ICM now, where a publisher could deposit directly. You as a repository have to enable the direct deposit via SOT protocol or via HTTP interface. So we need to know your OA PMH URL. And if it's an HTTP kind of depositing, then we need to have those details. And then it could be done for the articles from your authors. A number of open access publishers also have APIs where you could enable that. So maybe this direct depositing could be one of the next topics. And with ACM, we are testing now with one of the repositories that IFO manages, Merrill National Portal in Myanmar. So we'll show how it works, and we are using SOT for that. So how do our journal get the open access license to publish? Is the next question. And if you want to use a Creative Commons license, then you just need to choose what kind of license you would like to use, and just select this license, have a policy in place, describe it in your instructions to authors, and just use this license. So it's not like someone will be giving you this license. You just choose the one you like, and you can start using it. And if I haven't answered your question fully, please add again. Thanks for clarifying, directly by the publishers. So yeah, for now it's just ACM that we have collaboration with, but I hope we'll have more publishers that Eiffel works with, but it could also be a publisher that Eiffel doesn't work with, but still has an API. So let's maybe dedicate. We'll be in touch with you, George, and we'll also try to have a dedicated webinar. Then so there is a request. Could you please collect all links to the publisher policies about deposit and IR on one page on the Eiffel website? So I guess that's something that we'll need to discuss with Loren, because what we have now is a Google Doc, but it's a Google Doc with a status at the moment of us checking that, and I guess we're a bit worried if we make it available, and then if a publisher changes the policies, I don't know, maybe we could add as of, I don't know, 25th of July. That's the current status. What do you think, Loren?
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a tricky thing, because as you say, Irina, these policies, publisher policies, just to make everything more complicated, do change. And I just would add, and we were talking about this earlier, Irina, that some of the large publishers, you really do need to go down to the journal level, because, for example, large publishers like Taylor and Francis or Wiley or Elsevier indeed will have policies about their own journals, but they also publish on their platforms journals which are owned by society publishers, and they might have different policies. And I think that's where the DOAJ is a really useful tool, isn't it, Irina, to check at the journal level.
You mean Sherpa Romeo?
I did mean Sherpa Romeo. Yes, thank you. I did indeed mean Sherpa Romeo.
Yeah, you could also use DOAJ to check.
Yes, sorry, I mean
policies of open access journals.
I did mean Sherpa Romeo. Sorry for the confusion.
So yeah, if what we know we have on the slides that I'll share, and yeah, maybe it's better if you keep your own document with this information. But we'll bring it back to our director and we'll see what she thinks about it. Thank you. So Henry is asking, as a manager of an institutional repository, can I write to journals requesting AAMs of articles published by lecturers in my institution? So as far as we know, journals really prefer an author approaching them. But I guess there is no harm. If for some reasons an author can't write, then I guess there is no harm of you trying to ask. But I don't know how journals will respond to that. And Tanya is asking what license should be applied to AAMs when publisher doesn't clearly define it. Yeah, unfortunately, that's a problem, because somehow optimistically I thought that when I'll be going through this list of publishers I was talking today, every one of them will have a specific reference to a license. But unfortunately, it wasn't the case, and there was a lot of room for interpretations in some cases. So I guess to be on the safe side, maybe, yeah, if you don't have an institutional policy about that, then just put a publisher copyright on it. Or yeah, you can't put a publisher copyright because this version belongs to an author. Yeah, I don't know if you have a repository policy which requires depositing under CC BY, for example, then if that repository policy doesn't contradict a publisher policy clearly stated, then you can make it available on the CC BY. If you don't have that clear repository policy, then you can just enable probably public access, but with no reuse rights. So it's like copyright only version. But I don't know, Lauren, do you have any suggestions? Because that's a tricky question, and that's where rights protection is really.
It is a tricky question, and I think you're right, Irina. You really need a repository policy, which you can then apply, and which then your authors will know, and it will be clear what your policy is. But also, as Irina said, you do also need to check with the journal, because as we pointed out, some of them say yes, you can put this in your repository, but only under a particular type of license. So I think you might want to think about your repository's overall policy, and then you would say that you make your AAMs available under that license, and it's clearly communicated to the authors, subject to any restrictions imposed by the particular journals, is probably what I would suggest.
Melissa, you raised your hand.
Yes, Irina, I'm sorry, my camera is not working, so you will only hear me. I usually advise repository managers to apply the most liberal license that available, because it's not stated. For example, Springer, in their new policies, they state that no Creative Commons licenses are allowed. So in this case, we can use all rights reserved. But for example, if a publisher says that only non-commercial use is allowed, then we put CC BY non-commercial. They don't say. So I'm afraid to ask them, because I'm afraid that they will say that all rights should be reserved. And I'm not sure whether they know what they actually mean. So if we assume that the authors retain their rights for this version, and there are no other limitations imposed by the publishers, then they can use CC BY. If they say you should use non-commercial, then they just use CC BY non-commercial. If they say you should use CC, because Elsevier says you should use CC BY non-commercial non-derivatives. So that's the idea. In Serbia, most repository managers use CC BY non-commercial non-derivatives in this case, because this is the safest license for them. Nobody gets angry. So that's the approach that we've defined over the past years, because over the past years the repository development has been quite active here. But this is a tricky issue.
And that's another reason why it would be useful if a university has a rights retention policy and could clearly say that authors are required to make also accepted manuscripts are openly available upon publication under SEC BY license, for example. And then that's something that authors could already show to publishers when they publish article, and then it would remove pressure from repository managers. But if there is no such policy, then there might be some pressure. There is a question from Maria, just to clarify, should we start using the term AAM rather than post-print? I do think that AAM is more self-explanatory to researchers, as there is a lot of confusion surrounding the terms preprints and postprints. I would say yes. If you want to use both, then say AAM, also known as postprint, or the version after peer review. Try to be as specific as possible, especially because funders and publishers use AAM now. That's like a linguistic change that happened in the repository world in the past, I don't know, couple of years.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the term that most of the publishers use as well on their website. So yeah, introducing that would help your authors to navigate these changes in terminology.
And Telejo Tiola is asking, does green open access always permits depositing into RAI immediately after acceptance? So as you saw, some publishers allow depositing immediately and then providing open access either at the moment of publication or after certain embargo period. And that's again another reason to clarify this in your repository and open access policy, because if you have an institutional document saying that authors are required to deposit immediately upon acceptance, because they still have that version in hand, so they're not confused where it is stored. And then you can provide open access when publisher allows and or when according to their wording of your policy. But you saw that there was 1 or 2 cases where this even immediate closed access depositing wasn't really allowed. In some cases, you'll have to check. And while we still have Milica here, maybe I can read Richard's question, and if you could help with answering it. That so Richard was asking, please, how do you set an alert in Scopus or in Scholar and get articles published by researchers in an institution? So I know about Google Scholar. When you Google, in my slides, I actually link to a Google Scholar alert page. And when you get there, you'll see set an alert button. And then you just click on it and you'll put your, you put K in UST, for example, or full name of your university, because you can have a couple of alerts. And then you'll be notified when Google Scholar has a paper which includes this phrase that you set up as an alert. But I've never, honestly, I've never used Scopus. I never had access to Scopus, so I don't know how to set it up in Scopus. And
there are several ways. The easiest way is if your institution has an institutional profile in Scopus, then there is a button there showing, enabling you to set up an alert. If it doesn't, then you need to perform an advanced search and find all the instances or the most of them of all the records where your institution is mentioned. So you would have to go to advanced search and use those fields, the affiliation field, and type the name, usually under the inverted commas, the name of your institution. And you will probably have to use several versions of this name. And then once you get the search results, there is a button, Save Search and Set Up Alert there at the top of the. We can make for April. We can make a kind of a few slides showing this, Irina, and distribute to the users.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would have to go to Scopus now in order to show this, and it will take time. So we will create a few slides and deliver this information. It's very useful. I've been using this for ages, and it's really very, very useful.
Thank you so much, Milica. Then we'll follow up with you on that, and yeah, we can also do training this. And then if you need to leave, we understand that because we're going past the hour, so you're free to leave, and we'll follow up with recording and with the slides. But there is one more question from Henry, and I think it's an important one. Within our repositories, can we set up collections that have versions of records of articles published by our lecturers and then restrict it to only members of the university community? This is when, for instance, we have subscribed to the journal. Will that infringe on copyright restrictions of the publisher? I'm thinking about the scenario in the event that if the journal site goes down, so flying, our members can still use what is in the repository. Thank you. And unfortunately, the answer is not, because those articles are protected by copyright, so you can't make them available in the repository, even in restricted access for your university community. So sometimes there might be provisions for including articles in course packs. So for example, Eiffel model license includes that provision, and then if there is such a provision, and if an article could be part of a Moodle course, for example, then you can make that article available on the course page, but not in the repository, unfortunately. Yeah, and that's the reason why we had to go through all these details of publisher copyright policies and permissions, because really, if it's copyright protected and version of record is copyright protected, is a publisher ownership, so you can't really deposit it.
I guess, Irina, it also highlights, it is a good question, because it highlights why the author's accepted manuscript is such an important version, particularly for those articles published with controlled access.
Thank you so much. I think that was a very productive hour, and if you still have any questions, please type in a Q&A or raise your hand, and we can spend another minute or two answering them. If you have your questions later on, please reach out to Loren and me. When you receive slides, you'll see our emails in case you don't have yet them, and we'll be happy to help. And if you think about writing your repository policy or your institutional rights retention policy, we'll be happy to help with that. And when we had a webinar with Coalition S, they were also saying that they'll be happy to comment on universities' rights retention policies, because it's really important, and it would clarify a lot of things, and would make it easier to share AAMs upon publication under an open license. Thank you so much. I don't see any new questions or any hands raised, and yeah, we'll follow up on direct repository depositing when we pilot this with ACM and Eiffel's repository. And, yeah, we'll also be in touch with more webinars later this year. So for those of you who was in summer season, enjoy summer. If it's a winter season now, hope it's not too cold at your place. And yeah, have a wonderful week, and see you at other Eiffel's webinars. Thank you, and thanks a lot, Loren and Milica, for helping out.
Thank you, everybody, for attending as well.
So we have one raised hand. I can make you a panelist if you want to. And, maybe you can ask your question. Well, actually, two people. Okay, so